Thank you for joining the Once Changing the World, India's first Future Tech Meets Sustainability podcast. I'm your host, Eddie Evelyn. Today, I'm delighted not to have with me Mr. Chris Williams, who is the head of research at Decentralized Science Applied Research, founded on expertise in drug development. The goal of DeSci Applied Research is to accelerate the ongoing global research into treating patients of rare diseases with genetic medicines. And the topic of discussion today is going to be decentralized science and the future of gene therapy. So, Chris, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. It would be great if you could start with a small, brief introduction background.
Yeah, happy to be here, Eddie. A brief introduction. So I'm from the United States and I studied biomedical engineering at the University of Michigan. And in 2009, I started to work in pharmaceutical development for a large pharmaceutical company in California. And I've been doing that ever since. And so a lot of my career has been built around developing medicines out of research concepts and making those medicines available for patients in clinical trials, and for the successful ones, making them commercially available for patients all around the world. And more recently, I've started to work on gene therapies, which are predominantly have been for rare genetic diseases, which although any one rare genetic disease may only affect a few hundred or fewer people, the rarest ones only affect one person, or at least there's been one confirmed case in the world. There's thousands of these rare genetic diseases. And so the fact that there are so many of them, there's lots of opportunity to have improvements in the overall health outcomes of millions of patients around the world. And so what I'm driven by is trying to make sure that the science and the technology that people like me have been developing over the last decades is available for everybody who could benefit from it.
All right. How cool is that? So I want to get into gene therapy and rare diseases. Before I get into that, in tech industry, there's something called as Moore's law, where the number of transistors on the chip doubles approximately, every 2 years. And the doubling also increases processing power and also reduces the cost, leading to more capable hardware at lower cost, which has been driving the exponential growth of all things tech while making it affordable and accessible. While in the healthcare space, there's something called as Eroom's law, which is pretty much the opposite. So can you explain Eroom's law and why the opposite seems to be happening in the drug discovery industry?
Right. So there's a couple things that contribute to it. But first, so Eroom's law is the idea that over time, there's been a steady progression that the amount of total investment into pharmaceuticals and into drug research is going up and linearly over time. So it's becoming more and more expensive for every new drug that gets developed and approved by the FDA or the EMA. And some of the reasons that are for this, the most common one is the better than the Beatles problem. Any new drug that we develop has to be better than anything else that's on the market. And so as we increase our understanding of biology, we're able to find new targets and potentially new drugs that we could use to treat patients, but they have to be shown to be superior and safer than the drugs that are already available. And so part of the reasons why it's getting more and more expensive is it's harder in order to develop and identify new drugs that are better than what's already been available. One of the advantages of gene therapies now is that you can target a disease at the genetic level, whereas before we were targeting it more at the protein level or cellular level or developing symptoms. But this is a new technology, and in order to develop a new technology to industrialize it and make it available, that requires a lot of investment into very basic science research, new materials in order to make these drugs, new methods in order to make them at a high quality. And so it does require a lot of research to go into every new medicine that gets approved. The other part of it is that drug development is very risky. And so when we say that it costs between $1 and $2 billion for every new drug that gets approved, it's not that it's $2 billion specifically was spent on that drug. $2 billion or $1 to $2 billion was invested into pharmaceuticals, and that covers also the high failure rate of drugs in clinical trials. And so there's significant challenges in being able to take a research concept, something that works in a petri dish or even in a mouse model in a lab, and then translate that to something that works in people. And so a lot of this cost is also going to covering the research into projects that ultimately, they teach us a lot about biology, they teach us a lot about disease and drug development, but they don't work out to be successful product opportunities to those expenses as well.
So you're mentioning that, the lab to market is riddled with, a lot of problems, it being risky, it being very hard, it's being expensive. And so we do understand that the drug discovery and the vaccine development is time consuming, it's expensive, it's hard. And the entire lab to market timelines can, normally sometimes the vaccine timelines are from 5 to 10 years. But then when COVID happened, we saw the opposite. The COVID vaccine was developed under a year. And what the public perception was, was because of, the entire kind of world came together to solve the problem. It was the academy, the industry, the investors, government, all coming together. So do you think that that ethos of coming together is kind of missing? And will be great if you can also give an overview of what decentralized science applied research is all about and also your mission.
What I can say is that from a drug development perspective, the idea of using an mRNA packaged into a lipid nanoparticle is not a completely novel idea. So that has been in development for other indications, probably as vaccines, but also as treatments for some time. And so there was a lot of prior knowledge based on how to manufacture these products, how the platform, the mRNA lipid nanoparticle platform would work and how to manufacture it. Now, looking back at it, we're a couple of years out of COVID and going through the development of the vaccine. And I've attended a number of industry conferences and had opportunities to meet with people who have contributed to developing the COVID vaccine. People from suppliers to drug developers to distributors. And what they have all said is that the pace at which we would develop that COVID vaccine is unsustainable and unrealistic to think that we would be able to develop all medicines that quickly. And that it really was, everything else is pushed aside and it was all hands on deck for this one medicine. And a lot of risk was taken, a lot of extra money was put into buying materials at risk or buying equipment so that it is ready when it's time to manufacture something. And so having the whole industry come together for one product or two products, a handful of products that came out of that, that was the right thing to do at the time, but it's not sustainable to think that we would be able to do that for all of the drug products and all of the vaccines that are in development. That being said, I think there are a lot of lessons that we learned from the COVID vaccine, and those are being applied to strengthen our supply chains, improve the way that we approach maybe regulatory agencies, and then also trying to get more not standards is the wrong word, but like alignment among different communities, scientific communities around the world, so that we can interplay with each other much more easily. Now, shifting to your second part of your question was about what specifically we're looking at with DeSci Applied Research. So one of the things that I mentioned about the COVID vaccine is that the mRNA platform is something that drugs are being developed on. And so the fact that a lot of the features and a lot of the know-how in order to develop drugs on this platform are already there, we could quickly and easily apply it to a new application. Gene therapies are very similar in that the way that our industry has developed gene therapies, some of them are on an mRNA lipid nanoparticle platform similar to the COVID vaccines. More commonly, they're on viral vector platforms. So I work on one called adeno-associated viral vectors. They're the most common that are used in vivo gene therapies, which means gene therapies that would go directly into the patient. And a lot of this technology is built around getting the gene therapy specifically to the tissues in the body or the cells in the body that need to have a correction in the expression of their DNA into proteins that are functional. And so if you think about the eye, for example, there's dozens, maybe hundreds of different genes that cause some sort of retinal degradation that causes blindness. So if we can develop a gene therapy to correct for one of those genetic conditions, then the theory would be that we would be able to swap out that gene, keep everything else the same, and then be able to treat a different genetic condition by putting in a different gene therapy. And then the same sort of thing could be applied to metabolic diseases, muscular diseases, neurodegenerative diseases. A lot of that goes into the development of the drug and can be what we call platformed, meaning that it's kept the same. And then we have to tweak the last, 20%, 10%. Still do a lot of safety studies, still do a lot of developing an understanding that the drug that we're delivering is going to be efficacious for that patient. It's going to be safe for that patient. But we don't have to start from scratch every time. And so what we want to try to do at DeSci Applied Research is to get that 80% of the drug development that could be platformable and be used over and over again, and make that accessible to as many researchers as possible so that it can be reapplied and it doesn't have to be reinvented over and over again.
You spoke about gene therapy. You gave us like a brief idea, but can you kind of explain gene therapy to the audience? That'll be really great. And its potential in the treatment for rare diseases.
Rare diseases are defined as a disease that affects less than 200,000 people in the United States and a similar number in Europe. And so of the diseases that are considered to be rare, that are recognized, that have been diagnosed, estimates since I've started working on them have raised from 8,000 up to greater than 10,000 number of unique genetic diseases, meaning that it's a different gene affecting a different part of the body, which translate into different symptoms or different conditions that the patients are experiencing. So there's thousands of them, right? And each of these are caused by some anomaly at a genetic level. So in the chromosome, in the gene, a patient either inherits an abnormal nucleotide, a switch, a deletion, or an insertion, and that causes part of their body or part of their biology to work incorrectly. So a gene therapy is the idea that we would be able to provide that patient with a correction to their genetic anomaly directly into the cells that are symptomatic because of this genetic anomaly. And so gene therapies, what we will do is we'll take some nucleic acid that is either a DNA or an RNA that has a correction for the genetic anomaly, and then one of the tricky parts is getting it specifically to those cells that need it. So all of your cells have the same genetic components to them, right? They all have the same chromosomes, but in gene, different cells and different tissues express different proteins differently, and so we want to be able to get that correction exactly where it needs to be. And so a viral vectored gene therapy, which is what kind that I'm working on, you have the genetic fix to the genetic anomaly that's causing the disease, and then the other half is how you get it there. And the reason that viral vectors are the common way of doing it is that naturally over millions of years, viruses have found clever ways of being able to get into the body and to get into different tissue types. And so in the beginning, what we've been doing is reapplying what natural, and we've gone with safe, non-pathogenic virus-like particles that are able to get to different tissues in the body, kind of re-engineering them. Instead of delivering genetic information to make more viruses, they deliver genetic information to treat a disease. And different viruses or different viral vectors will reach different parts of the body, the eye, the neurons, the muscles. And so we can deliver these genetic fixes, which then cause your cells to ideally create the therapeutic that is treating the disease and treating the disease symptoms. Now, more recently, what we're starting to do with the help of things like AI and machine learning and high throughput, robotics and high throughput chemistry and biology is to be able to engineer viruses. And so really accelerate the millions of years of evolution that, has been able to develop these viral vectors that can get to specific tissues, to make them safer, meaning that they're less immunogenic to the patient, that they're more specific, getting to where we want them to be and not other places, and also making them more efficacious. And so we can ultimately give a lower dose to the patient, and more of that product is getting to the cells that need a correction, and less of it is going, other places in the body where we don't need the genetic fix.
Right, right. So what, post the entire human genome sequence project, the assumption was that we will transition from the current reactive to a proactive, personalized healthcare. We would cure all genetic diseases with CRISPR-Cas9, and then there was, many do-it-yourself folks, around the world, in the lines of Dr. Joe Zahner is one I can remember, who started this company called Odin, was shipping out DIY, gene editing kits. But we still, far away from, getting like the therapies. So what are the challenges? What are the risks? What are the roadblocks, which is stopping us from developing these advanced therapies for these genetic rare diseases?
Yeah. So there's challenges at many different levels. Before the Human Gene Project, the challenge was really diagnosing the genetic cause of these diseases. And so, it was very expensive to sequence an entire human genome. All of our genes and every person, there's a lot of variability. And so to really kind of, correlate or find the causation of this particular gene is causing this particular disease, it was very expensive to treat or to do that for one patient, let alone to do it for the thousands or maybe millions of patients in order to be able to make those correlations. So through projects like the Human Genome Project and a lot of advancements in next generation sequencing, now we can identify the genes that are causing disease, and so we can find that source. So we've more or less crossed that path. The next one now is really understanding the complex systems of how a gene or a genetic anomaly will lead to a disease. And so within our body, genes, many genes have lots of different roles, and they do different things in different parts of the body. And so really understanding those complex pathways is something that is still, it's hard to say that it's a mystery, but it's often talked about, and it's often referred to as a black box, although I think less so now as we're getting more understanding of the different genomics and proteomics and epigenetics inside the body. But really understanding the complexity of these systems. And so that even if we can identify the gene that is incorrect, how do we know, what is the correction that needs to be made in order to get the body to return to a normal biology? So that was the next part. So the complex biology for each genetic disease is still a challenge, right? So there's thousands of diseases. So therefore you would think that you would need thousands of research projects to understand each one. So that's just to get to the diagnosis and then to get to the basic research of understanding the problem. Then it's finding a solution. And so there's limitations about what we can deliver in terms of a gene therapy. And so like how much DNA can be delivered, how to get it to where it needs to be, how to keep it from going to where it doesn't need to be. A lot of genes are regulated differently. And so it's not like if you want to express a protein that does something in the body, it's not like you're turning on your faucet all the way or all the way off. You need to kind of modulate, and sometimes maybe you need more protein under certain conditions or less protein under other conditions. And so having that sort of feedback, that natural feedback in the body is also important for having natural biology. And so getting that right is a challenge. The next part is an industrial part, and then I'll get back to your question. This is a relatively new technology, and so being able to manufacture these types of products to the quality level that would be needed to show that it's safe to put into a person, that also has been very expensive, as it prior to maybe the last decade, most of this research was being done in the lab. Now that's being industrialized. There's a lot of capital that needs to be invested in order to build manufacturing facilities. There's a lot of skilled laborers who need to be trained in order to do the work necessary to do the research and to manufacture these products. And there's also a lot of infrastructure in hospitals and in treatment centers in order to take care of these patients. Because it's not just that you give somebody a shot and that you send them home. There's a lot of preparatory care to prepare somebody to receive a gene therapy. You administer the gene therapy, and then there's a lot of follow-up that needs to take place as well to make sure that the drug is doing what it's supposed to be doing, and that the patient is not experiencing any significant negative side effects. And so it'll take some time to build up all of the infrastructure around the technology in order to make this a reality.
Right. So it's still in nascent stage, still has quite a lot of problems. But I'm sure the next few years, this is going to get more streamlined. It's going to get more democratized and accessible, because currently gene therapy seems to be like really, really expensive. I was just reading a Bloomberg article, and it said that there's one gene therapy which is priced at somewhere around $4.25 million.
Yeah.
So which rare disease or genetic disorder is your team going after, DeSci Applied Research, or are there any projects that you are supporting trying to solve that a specific problem?
So there's not a specific disease that we're going after. What we're trying to think about is, how do we make this gene therapy more accessible to all patients who potentially would need them? And so with that, the focus isn't on a particular disease. So like I said, there's thousands, and the estimate right now is maybe 10,000 rare diseases. 85% of those or so are genetic in nature, right? And so now you're thinking about thousands of genetic diseases. The other thing that I haven't spoke about yet is that genetic diseases, as you go down in patient prevalence. So if you have a genetic disease that affects maybe 100,000 patients, there's only a few of them. There's a lot more that affect 10,000. There's a lot more that affect only 1,000. There's a ton more that only affect maybe hundreds of patients, right? The industry right now, the pharmaceutical industry and a lot of biotech industry, they're focused on genetic diseases that, and the drugs that have been approved have impacted genetic diseases that affect somewhere between 5,000 and more patients, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 patients. The handful of genetic gene therapies that are on the market, approved by FDA and EMA, they're going after patient groups that are populations that are in that range. There's thousands of diseases that have a lesser patient population. And for a lot of reasons and a lot of economical reasons, as well as some logistical reasons, the industry is not so interested in going into lower and lower patient prevalences when there's still a lot of work to be done on genetic diseases that affect 10,000 patients or more. And so what we're trying to think about is, how do we make gene therapies or accelerate the making of gene therapies accessible to patient populations that are below this sort of invisible threshold, where a lot of the industry doesn't see it as economically viable or doesn't see it as profitable enough to invest everything that needs to be into a single product. And this is where the advantages that I would see in something like decentralized science could be, in that you have a platform. A high percentage of what needs to go into drug development can be platformed and used over and over again. So if we can democratize that, and so people who are interested in smaller patient populations for reasons other than just because it's the most profitable, they have the tools at their disposal, and that they can work together and through network effects bring down that cost and make it more sustainable, in order to think that we'd be able to make gene therapies available to thousands of different diseases that only affect maybe hundreds of patients each. And so that's kind of been our strategy. Not particular diseases, but developing decentralized science platforms that could be used by anybody who fits within kind of this threshold, or at least that's what we're focusing on, is this threshold. Less than a few thousand, more than tens of patients, but in a fully democratized science community, There's no reason why somebody couldn't, use these types of platforms to develop drugs for more prevalent indications, as well as for even the ultra rare, nano rare indications where maybe there's only a handful of patients available. And you wouldn't commercialize the product. You just want to make something that might be able to help your child or, a small, community of people.
Right. Chris, more power to you and your team. And we need more entrepreneurs who think in terms like this, because I guess the pharma industry is obviously they're going to be always going to be go for where the economical benefit is rather than these rare diseases with maybe just hundreds or just maybe thousands of patients. So more power to you and your team. Can you elaborate on how DeSci Applied Research works? Because there is VitaDAO, which is a community-owned collective funding which supports longevity. How does DeSci do this? I mean, because there is Web3, blockchain. Are you guys leveraging that technology? Because that's something which has got like a lot of negative press, largely because of the NFTs and crypto. But the ethos behind, I think, blockchain, crypto, or NFT, I think it's very egalitarian. With decentralization, transparency, open ownership, or personal data and secure. So how are you leveraging DAOs, blockchain? If yes, how are you doing that? It would be great if you could elaborate on DeSci Applied Research.
So the anchor that we have is that we want to do what is needed to maximize the benefit that we can do, or that maximize the benefit that we can bring to patients and to society. So how do we create platforms or create technologies that ultimately lead to more medicines being available to more patients? That's where we're starting. So at the beginning of our journey, when we were thinking out conceptually what this would look like, decentralized science and things that are from coming out of the Web3 community that was first DeFi and then DeSci, that was very interesting to us, and that was very attractive, and there was a lot of very motivated people that were in there in these communities, and I met with a lot of them, and there was a lot of advantages to blockchain, the mechanics behind it of decentralized ownership and of intellectual property with IP NFTs, something that a company like Molecule is championing with VitaDAO. That was very exciting, and it fit really well with what we were trying to do. So I started out, with the idea that we would use blockchain as a technical component of our platforms, and that we would work with the DeSci community. And I had put together this proposal of how this would work, and I brought it to a pharma and biotechnology industry conference. And I had the perfect venue where I was in a conference about alternative funding strategies and how do you develop for these rare patient groups. And I talked about decentralized collaboration and decentralized ownership and application of intellectual property, and using the power of the blockchain to control all of this. And to be honest, I got very, very mixed reviews. People loved the idea. They hated the blockchain. I mean, they were, I think a lot of probably what you were alluding to, or what you've talked to with other people, there's a little bit of a kind of a tarnish on the reputation of a blockchain technologies, blockchain applications. And so this was really troubling because, we have an idea, something that we want to deliver on, that people are open to, but they're, skeptical of the mechanics that go on behind it. But after that, I kind of continued on and said, okay, well, maybe they can learn, maybe like people will come around to it. And I started to meet with more technical people in the blockchain community, and I started to describe, what it was that I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it, and where my priorities were. Priorities are, how do we maximize our impact to the patients and making medicines available? A lot of the benefits of the blockchain, having a permissionless system, having something that is, totally interchangeable and anonymous and things like that, that was a nice feature, but that wasn't required. And so what I learned from them is that while blockchain is something that could do what I'm wanting to do, it wasn't absolutely required. And so, to be honest, we've pulled away a little bit from the idea of trying to be a Web3 company or trying to be a blockchain-based company or blockchain forward, and to really think about, how do we use maybe Web2 technologies, or use Web3 technologies related to blockchain under the hood, but it's not something that, is advertised about, in order to bring, researchers who are very good at what they're doing, or companies that are, used to working within the legacy pharmaceutical companies or within the legacy pharmaceutical industry, who do have a lot to offer and do have, skills and capital and technology that we can use, but we don't want to scare them away. We want to have something that they're comfortable working with as well. And that's kind of been where our focus has been. So, if we want to use the concepts of decentralized science, yes, I think that's very important. I think that's moving in the right direction. A lot of the mechanics of it, if it moves us forward and if it's beneficial, we will use it. If it's not beneficial, or if we actually seems that it becomes an impediment, if there's another alternative, then we'll go with that technology.
Completely fair. Are there any advice or, words to, the families who are affected with rare diseases? Is there any hope? What's the timelines you think that, where there could be actual therapies for these rare diseases?
For some rare diseases, there are family groups who have already been successful in kind of, going on this journey, and from their child or their child gets diagnosed with something, they connect through the internet and through communities to find other children that have a similar diagnosis. And then through their local connections and other, sometimes even global connections, they're able to raise money and find partnerships with biotech companies, with pharmaceutical companies, with manufacturers, in order to do that development, in order to get a product into clinical trials, and so that they can give their child hope that there potentially would be a treatment for their condition. But a lot of that hope is also for all of the children who, are yet to be born that will have the same disease. So it's already happening at a very small scale. The goal here is to try to make it easier to happen at a much larger scale. So there's many more patient groups who would like to do this, but they get stuck at one phase or another in the drug discovery and development process. We're taking the approach of trying to have a startup that provides technical platforms that enables them to move forward. But there are also industry consortium that some of them that I sit on, that realize that there's a lot of technology and capabilities that we have at large industry companies that we just don't have the bandwidth, or we don't have the capability to apply them at the broad scope to reach all these smaller indications. So how can we work with public-private partnerships in order to make these products more available? So that's another way. And what I'm really impressed by, and that I'm trying to engage with more, are kind of larger patient organizations. And so there's really great organizations like NORD in the United States, and Eurordis in Europe, and then Global Genes, and they're really focused on bringing together different patient groups who are facing similar challenges for different rare diseases. And so engaging with them and trying to right now really understand what their biggest pain points are, where they're getting stuck the most, and what they're looking for in technical solutions in order to help them work together, not only just for the moral support of saying that they're not in this alone, but in actually getting the scientific community engaged and helping them to develop drugs that maybe be able to support them. Yeah.
Right. So just kind of pushing on the last question. We earlier spoke about how gene therapy is like really, really expensive. Do you think this with gene sequencing, AI, ML, would that accelerate drug discovery and possibly democratize healthcare? Do you see that? Are there timelines that you have in your head that, could we could get to something that you would like to share?
I think all of that stuff is going to help. I think having things like artificial intelligence it will be helpful in expanding the bandwidth at which research can be done, right? So without artificial intelligence, you have to have a very skilled PhD level, scientist and a whole team of scientists to develop a drug. So if you have something like artificial intelligence, maybe we don't need, there's millions of researchers who are highly skilled because we don't have them, right? Artificial intelligence can kind of expand the bandwidth of what we would be able to do. And then in terms of the bringing down the cost, a lot of that comes from some of it comes from the discovery of the drug, but also the development and able to manufacture a product, be able to get regulatory approval, the supply chain, and able to come up with, some of these are very expensive materials that come from all over the world that we have to bring together in a manufacturing site in order to go through a process that might take a month or two from the point where you thaw first cell to the point where you have vials of drug that you can administer to the patient. And so all of this physical cost, the physical cost of infrastructure, of capital, the operating cost of labor, of energy, of materials and consumables, all of that is contributing to the high cost of these medicines. Now, as the process development, people who have jobs like me are, as we're successful in developing processes that are more efficient, that are more productive, we can bring down a lot of those costs in order to manufacture and make the drugs available. And so that will contribute to the lowering of cost. The other kind of significant thing that I think will come probably through AI as well as through other deep technologies is lowering the risk of at the different phases of drug development. So, and what I mean by that is right now, on average, every drug that gets out of a laboratory and we want to start in clinical trials, 9 out of 10 of them are going to fail in clinical trials. Either the target is wrong, they're not, efficacious enough, they weren't found to be safe. And so, how do we reduce the risk of investing heavily into a product that isn't going to go anywhere, right? And so if we can reduce the risk reduce the number of failures, that reduces the amount of sunk cost that has to be recuperated by the successful products. And then that in theory would bring down the total cost of the new drugs that are entering the market. The other perspective that I want to give, because this one, as a scientist, it kind of tears me apart a little bit inside. A lot of the cost of a medicine has to do with the cost that it offsets, right? So if you have a rare genetic disease that requires constant care for that patient over 20 of years, or for example, like hemophilia, where that patient maybe has to receive infusions of factor 8 or factor 9 or something like that over many, many years, that's very expensive. So if we can give somebody a gene therapy that offsets millions of dollars of cost, then it's cost effective. And this is what they say, it's cost effective to charge $3 million for that gene therapy because you're offsetting $9 million, $10 million of cost of caring for that patient over a period of time. And so there also is a component of thinking about how do we fund future research today that is contributing to the fact that medicines, and it's not just gene therapies, but all drugs are expensive, especially in places like the United States and Europe.
Right. What comes next for DeSci Applied Research? And will be great if you can leave the audience behind your possibly like a prediction or trend of what you think is going to happen for the future of healthcare in this decade, by the end of this decade.
I think what's going to happen is the technology, the medicinal technology that underlies the development of all drugs is going to mature to a point where we have a much better understanding of the risks, as well as a much better control over the cost of developing these types of medicines. And that's going to make it more attractive to making it more democratized and available to other patients. And what we're trying to do with DeSci Applied Research is to say, if you look at the totality of patients who have an ultra rare genetic disease, even if it's a few patients per disease, but because there's so many, there's thousands of them, here's an entire customer segment that the pharma industry is leaving on the table, that they're not adapted into being able to serve. And so I think that innovations, not only in technology, but innovations in how those technologies get applied through things like decentralized science or a lot of the things that I'm trying to work on here at DeSci Applied Research will be incorporated into business models in order to reach this customer base. And that's going to ultimately lead to, a value to, most importantly, those patients who need these medicines, but then also to society at large, those patients, their parents, their families, their communities, and to have hope for them, and then lower the burden on those people as well. And so there is value there. I think there's sustainable value there if we can bring down the cost of treating an individual disease area and helping people to work pre-competitively on the areas of the science that they can all benefit from. And I think that's really going to open up a whole new market and a whole new way of working and more collaboratively to treat these patients. And then the stretch goal that I would have is that these medicines that go for millions of dollars to patients, in the United States are not limited to just the United States and Europe. Genetic disease is a global problem. And so it's unrealistic to think that we would be able to treat patients all around the world for millions of dollars each. We really need to think about how do we make these medicines available to everybody who needs them, regardless of where they were born. And so I think that's something else that through a lot of these decentralized technologies and the fact that things can be shared pre-competitively and through the power of the internet and connecting everybody, that they will be more available to people regardless of where they're from.
Chris, really, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. I really loved and enjoyed the conversation. Appreciate the effort that you're doing. The pharma industry obviously goes towards, the economical benefits, but we need more entrepreneurs who find a way to solve a problem, for these rare diseases, and because I think the world is not equitable, and it's about time we, like you said, I think, when you create these, whether it's a tech, whether it's a healthcare solution, largely it's always into the West, but, it's the rest of the world is completely missed out. But I hope that we create technology, we create healthcare services and solutions which benefits the entire world, where it becomes more accessible. So on that note, really, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. And to my listeners, if you like what you see in here, then please press the subscribe button. And until next time, see you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate this.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I had a great time.
Super.